Okay, so you know how we were talking about doing a deep dive into Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution?
Yeah,
Well, we're finally doing it.
right.
We're tackling this book because a lot of you have been asking about it. And to be honest, it really is a pretty big deal in the world of diet and weight loss. So what we really want to do is just kind of cut through all the hype and get to the core of what Dr. Atkins was saying about, like, food and health.
Right. And it's not just some fad diet book,
Oh,
right?
totally.
It's really trying to make us rethink like how we look at food.
Yeah.
And when you look inside, I mean, it covers so much, like why Dr. Atkins thought the low-fat thing was a problem,
Yeah.
how important insulin is, this whole historical perspective on like what people ate, way back when, and a really big warning about sugar and those refined carbs.
Uh-huh.
It even looks at how different cultures used to eat. And then, of course, it goes into the whole Atkins nutritional approach.
Right, exactly. And we know you're busy, so we want to just pull out like the most important stuff, the stuff that really matters, and explain it in a way that makes sense and, keeps you engaged.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's jump right in, okay? The book starts by talking about this whole low-fat diet narrative that was like everywhere for so long.
Yeah, and it makes a really interesting observation about like this big shift that happened. Starting back in the 1970s, Americans started cutting back on fat. They went from about 40% of their calories from fat down to like 33%. But then something else happened. They started eating way more refined carbs like sugar and white flour.
Right, that's a really important point. Like one goes down, the other shoots up.
Exactly.
The book doesn't hold back. It kind of calls out the USDA's food guide pyramid, the one that told us to eat like 6 to 11 servings of bread and stuff every day. The book's argument is that all those refined carbs were a big reason why we've seen so much obesity and diabetes.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically just cutting fat wasn't the answer, especially if we were replacing it with like worse stuff.
Right. And if you look at some of the scientific research that's come out since then, even some of the stuff that was around when the book was written,
Yeah.
it kind of suggests that those low-fat, high-carb diets might have had some bad effects. Like they could lead to higher insulin levels and high triglycerides.
Oh, right. And those high triglycerides, those are a big warning sign for heart disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the book also talks about how diets that, intentionally control carbs could actually reverse those unhealthy trends.
So it all comes back to insulin.
Yeah.
That's like a central theme in the book, right?
It is.
This whole idea of insulin's role in our health.
And the book's main point about insulin is that having too much of it in your blood, which is called hyperinsulinism, by the way, is a major driver of obesity. But it's not just about being overweight. It's linked to a bunch of other serious health problems too, like, diabetes, hardening of the arteries, high blood pressure. There was even research suggesting potential links to breast cancer and polycystic ovarian syndrome, even back then. So insulin does a lot more than just control blood sugar.
Yeah, and basically the book explains it like this. Insulin is the main hormone that tells your body to store fat.
Right. Like a traffic cop directing nutrients.
Exactly. When insulin is high, it's like a signal to store fat.
Yep. And when your insulin levels are up all the time, your body gets really good at taking that extra energy from your food and turning it into fat. And then it makes it harder to burn that fat later on.
It's almost like your body's working against you.
In a way, yeah.
It's always fascinating to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture, like how what we eat has changed over time. And the book does that. It goes into the history of like human eating patterns.
Right. And it points at some pretty interesting differences. Like for most of human history, millions of years, we basically ate whole, unprocessed foods. Meat, fish, poultry, fruits, vegetables, berries, whatever was in season. And that's what people ate.
Makes sense, right? That's what was available.
Exactly. And even, up to the 19th century, you see things like beef, pork, butter, eggs, lard, and beef tallow as common foods.
Wow. A long way from the low-fat craze that came later.
Yeah, totally.
And then in the 20th century, things really started to change.
Yeah, they did. And the book points to this key period between 1910 and 1970, a time when heart disease was really on the rise. And during that time, animal fat and butter intake actually went down a little bit. Cholesterol intake stayed pretty much the same.
Huh.
But the big change was that refined carbohydrate consumption, like sugar, corn syrup, and white flour, went up a ton, like 60%.
So the book is saying it wasn't the fat that caused the heart disease, it was the refined carbs.
That's the argument.
And the timing, I mean, it's interesting, right?
Yeah,
Like all this happening at the same time.
The book makes a direct connection between the rise of things like sugary soda, which became really popular starting in the 1890s,
Yeah.
and these big mills that could make white flour really cheaply, and the increase in those kinds of diseases. It's like those processed nutrient-poor foods started replacing the more traditional whole foods, and that's what caused problems.
And speaking of sugar, the book really goes after sugar. It calls it like a slow poison.
It does, yeah, and it backs that up with some pretty striking numbers. Like in 1828, the average person in the U.S. was eating about 12 pounds of sugar a year.
Okay.
But by 1928, just 100 years later, they were eating almost 10 times that much.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It is. And if you look at more recent data, like from the late 90s, consumption of caloric sweeteners, mostly sugar and high fructose corn syrup, had gone up from 124 pounds per person in 1975 to 158 pounds in 1999.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That means like almost 750 calories a day from sugar for a lot of people.
Exactly. Over a third of their daily calories from stuff that's basically nutritionally empty and, according to the book, metabolically harmful. The book is pretty clear. Sugar doesn't do anything good for you, and it's actually bad for your health.
So we're talking about a ton of empty calories that just kind of snuck into our diets.
Right.
And that really lines up with all the health problems that started to like skyrocket.
Yeah, exactly.
And the book uses this really interesting example to make this point. It talks about the French paradox, the way things used to be in France.
Right. So a few decades ago, the French ate a diet that was actually higher in fat than the American diet. They ate things like butter, cheese, even goose liver pet, and they had way lower rates of heart disease and obesity than Americans.
Even though they were eating similar amounts of like meat and fish.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And the book points out that Americans were eating about 5 times more sugar per person than the French at that time. It's like, maybe fat wasn't the villain after all.
Right. It really makes you question those old low-fat guidelines.
It does.
Yeah.
But the book also says that as the French have started eating more like Americans, with all the fast food and processed stuff, they've been losing that health advantage.
So it all comes back to those refined, sugary foods.
Yeah, exactly.
So if all that conventional dietary advice was wrong, what's the right way to eat? Like, what does the book actually suggest?
Well, it basically says we need to go back to eating the way humans ate for centuries. Natural, whole, unrefined foods, both animal and vegetable.
Okay.
Things like fish, lamb, steak, lobster, nuts, berries, cheese, eggs, butter, a lot of salad greens, and non-starchy vegetables. The main idea is to eat food that's actually good for you.
Nutrient dense, like we were saying before.
Exactly. And it ties this back to that low-fat trend. Remember how we talked about how when fat consumption started going down around 1975, weight gain started going up?
Yeah.
The book uses that to argue that the low-fat approach just didn't work, and it might have even made things worse because people started eating, less healthy stuff instead of fat.
So the book's not just about cutting carbs, it's also about eating better quality food.
Right, and it makes this point about blood sugar, how important it is to keep your blood sugar stable.
Yeah, what's the thinking there?
Well, it basically says that when you eat foods that cause those big spikes and crashes in blood sugar, you end up craving more food and feeling hungry even when you don't really need to eat.
I can see that.
And when you eat those nutrient-dense, unprocessed foods, your body gets what it needs. So you feel more satisfied and naturally eat less.
So it's not just about calories, it's about how the food affects your body.
Exactly.
The book even gives some practical advice like, get rid of all the sugar in your house and shop around the edges of the grocery store where the fresh food is.
Yeah, that's good advice.
So this all leads us to the Atkins nutritional approach, the actual diet plan.
Right. And the book presents it as a structured but flexible plan. There are guidelines, but you can adapt it to your own tastes as long as you stick to those acceptable foods.
Makes sense.
And there's a whole section on food and recipes. Tons of ideas for meals that are like what the book calls controlled carb.
Okay.
And it also says that this approach can help with a lot of the problems people have when they're dieting, like irritability, low energy, fatigue, mood swings, trouble concentrating, sleep problems, anxiety, dizziness, brain fog, and of course, those crazy cravings.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is.
We were talking earlier about insulin and how it affects fat storage. But the book also goes into all the other negative effects of having high insulin.
Yeah, it paints a bigger picture. Like when your insulin levels are high all the time, your body holds on to more salt and water. And that can raise your blood pressure.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and insulin's also involved in the whole process of those plaques building up in your arteries, the stuff that leads to heart disease. Plus, high insulin usually goes along with high triglycerides and low HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol.
Okay.
And we already talked about the possible links to breast cancer and polycystic ovary syndrome.
So managing insulin isn't just about weight, it's about everything,
It really is.
like your whole metabolic health.
Exactly.
The book also talks about this vicious cycle that happens when you eat a lot of carbs and your body makes too much insulin.
Right. So basically, when you eat a lot of carbs, especially the refined ones, your blood sugar shoots up. And then your pancreas pumps out a bunch of insulin to try to get that sugar into your cells.
Okay.
But if you're constantly overloading your system with carbs, your blood sugar never gets a chance to stabilize, and your insulin stays high all the time.
I see.
And that makes it really hard for your body to burn fat.
Because it's always in storage mode.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So the book says that by lowering your carb intake, you can lower your insulin levels and your triglycerides.
It all comes back to insulin.
Yeah, it does.
But there's one really important thing to remember.
What's that?
If you're taking medication for diabetes, you absolutely have to talk to your doctor before you start Atkins because your doses might need to change.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Yeah,
Safety first.
definitely.
Okay, so we've got to talk about ketosis.
All right.
It's kind of a big deal with Atkins, right? The book also talks about something called lipolysis.
Yeah, and it's good to be clear about the difference between those two.
So what is it?
Well, lipolysis basically means dissolving fat, and that's what we're trying to do when we want to lose weight. When your body burns fat for energy, it breaks down into glycerol and fatty acids.
Okay.
And Atkins is all about getting your body to burn fat instead of carbs. That's lipolysis.
Got it.
Now, ketosis is something that happens when you eat very few carbs, like during that first phase of Atkins, induction.
Right.
When you cut way back on carbs, your liver starts making ketones, which your body can use as fuel instead of glucose.
So it's like a backup energy source.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really important to know that this kind of ketosis, the kind you get from the diet, is totally different from diabetic ketoacidosis.
Right. That's a serious complication of diabetes.
Exact.
Totally different things.
So the book gives this like before and after menu example to show the kind of dietary changes it's talking about.
Right. So the typical pre-Atkins day menu looks something like this. Cheese Danish and coffee with half and half for breakfast, French fries and a pastrami and corned beef on rye for lunch.
Wow, that's a lot of carbs.
It is.
Mhm.
Then pretzels and a Nessa Crunch bar for snacks. And for dinner, kippered herring, cabbage, a salad with rye thins, diet soda, and vanilla ice cream.
Okay, I'm definitely seeing the problem here.
Yeah, all that adds up to over 2,000 calories. Then, in contrast, the typical Atkins day might be tuna salad and half a grapefruit with decaf coffee for breakfast.
Okay.
Grilled chicken with a salad and dressing for lunch. And then for dinner, a rib steak with summer squash and a salad with dressing, and seltzer to drink. So it's not just about fewer calories, it's about different kinds of food.
Right, less processed stuff, more protein and vegetables.
Exactly.
Now we've got to talk about the whole carbs versus calories thing. Atkins is all about counting carbs, not calories.
It is.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, the main idea is to control your intake of those easily digestible carbs that quickly turn into glucose and spike your blood sugar. And you want to spread those carbs out throughout the day to keep your blood sugar stable.
So it's not just about the amount, it's about when you eat them too.
Exactly. And the book makes this really important point that not all carbs are created equal.
Right.
Some carbs break down into glucose really quickly, while others, like fiber, don't really get digested, so they don't have much of an impact on your blood sugar.
That's where the whole net carbs thing comes in, right?
Exactly. You subtract the fiber from the total carbs to get the net carbs, the ones that actually count. And the book mentions that the FDA didn't require food labels to list indigestible carbs separately back then, which Dr. Atkins thought was a problem.
So we're really focused on the carbs that affect our blood sugar.
Right.
And the book really talks up fiber, even though it doesn't count towards those net carbs.
Yeah, fiber's super important. It helps lower cholesterol, gets rid of toxins, reduces the risk of things like diverticulitis. It helps your digestion, supports your immune system.
It does a lot.
It does.
And it even recommends fiber supplements, especially during that induction phase. Things like psyllium husks, wheat bran, flaxseed meal.
Yeah, those can be really helpful, especially if you're not used to eating a lot of fiber. And don't forget to drink plenty of water when you're increasing your fiber intake.
Right. That's important.
Yeah.
So for people who are new to this, how do you actually calculate those net carbs when you're looking at a food label?
It's pretty easy. You just take the total grams of carbs on the label and subtract the grams of fiber. That number you get, that's your net carbs, the ones you need to keep track of.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Now, the book also talks about the glycemic index, or GI. What's that all about?
So the GI basically tells you how quickly different carb-containing foods raise your blood sugar compared to pure glucose. Glucose has a GI of 100, and everything else is ranked against that. The book gives you a whole list of foods and their GI values, things like breads, cereals, fruits, pasta.
So lower GI is better?
Generally, yeah. Foods with a lower GI raise your blood sugar more slowly, which is better for your overall health.
And the book even has this tip about pasta.
Oh, yeah, the al dente thing.
Yeah.
Cooking your pasta al dente, slightly firm, can actually lower the GI because it slows down digestion.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a good trick.
So it's not just about avoiding carbs altogether. It's about making smarter choices.
Exactly.
Choosing the carbs that won't mess with your blood sugar. And the book also stresses how important it is to eat a lot of non-starchy vegetables.
Yeah, vegetables are key. They're packed with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. The book specifically mentions things like beta-carotene, which you find in carrots, broccoli, squash, lycopene, which is especially high in tomatoes, and lutein, which is in leafy greens like kale and spinach.
Those are all like power-packed nutrients.
They are. And the book gives you some good advice on how to eat more veggies.
Oh, yeah.
Like try to include them throughout the day, not just in one big meal. Pair them with protein and healthy fats to slow down carb absorption. Look for recipes where vegetables are like the main ingredient.
Okay.
Avoid juicing because you lose a lot of the fiber that way.
Oh, that's a good point.
And cook them carefully so you don't destroy the nutrients.
Any exceptions to that rule?
Actually, tomatoes are an exception. Cooked tomatoes have more available lycopene than raw ones.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Now, I know some people might think Atkins is all about meat and bacon, but the book actually talks about vegetables quite a bit.
It does, yeah.
Huh.
And it even addresses those meat and potatoes folks who might not be so keen on veggies.
What does it say to them?
It encourages them to try new recipes and ways of cooking vegetables. Like maybe they'll discover some veggies they actually like if they give them a chance.
Right. There are so many different ways to cook veggies.
Exactly.
And even if you love your meat, vegetables are still super important for your health.
For sure.
And when it comes to fruit, the book seems to have a favorite.
Yeah, berries are definitely the stars.
Berries are great.
They are. And the book explains that vegetables generally give you more antioxidants per carb compared to most fruits.
So you get more bang for your buck.
Exactly. But once you're past that initial strict phase, you can start adding some lower carb fruits like berries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. They have a lower GI, so they don't spike your blood sugar as much.
Okay, so to recap some of the key takeaways about carbs, vegetables, and fruits.
Yeah.
Count your net carbs.
Uh-huh.
Use the GI as a guide.
Okay.
Eat whole vegetables. Don't juice them.
Right.
Don't overcook your veggies, unless it's tomatoes.
Got it.
Add fat and protein to your salads to slow down absorption.
Okay.
Choose those nutrient-rich, low-sugar vegetables.
Yeah.
And when it comes to fruit, stick to berries.
Makes sense.
Now, I know Atkins has gotten some criticism over the years.
Yeah, for sure.
The book talks about some of that, too. It calls them fallacies.
It does. And it's important for people to understand that the book tries to address those criticisms head on. Like the first one it tackles is that Atkins is just a high-fat diet that's bad for your heart.
Right, that's a common one.
Yeah. But the book says, no, it's not about eating as much fat as you want. It's about controlling your carbs. And it actually aims to improve your cholesterol and all that.
So it's about the type of fat, too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it doesn't say to go crazy on saturated fat. It recommends moderation and emphasizes healthy fats.
And what about the claim that you lose weight on Atkins because you're losing water, not actual fat?
Right. So the book acknowledges that you do lose some water weight at the beginning of any diet. But it says that on Atkins, the real lasting weight loss comes from burning stored fat.
So the water weight is just temporary.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the idea that Atkins is unbalanced and doesn't give you all the nutrients you need?
Well, the book says that's not true either. It argues that by focusing on whole, unprocessed foods, including lots of vegetables, Atkins can actually give you more nutrients than a typical American diet that's full of processed carbs.
So it's not about deprivation, it's about eating better.
Exactly.
Some people worry that Atkins is too restrictive, like it's not something you can do long term.
Yeah, that's another fallacy the book addresses. It says that people on Atkins don't learn to eat too much fat, and they're not worse off if they stop. It says Atkins is a sustainable way of eating because it's satisfying and good for you.
Okay.
And it also addresses the constipation thing that you don't get enough fiber on Atkins. It says that the plan includes lots of fiber-rich vegetables, and it recommends fiber supplements if you need them.
So you're covered either way.
Yeah. And it even tackles the idea that you can't keep the weight off on Atkins.
Yeah.
It says that because it helps you find a sustainable way of eating, you can maintain your weight loss, unlike those super restrictive diets that are impossible to stick to.
So it's about finding a way of eating that works for you.
It's exactly.
Now, the book spends a lot of time talking about pre-diabetes. Why is that so important?
Well, the book makes this point that the damage from prediabetes can start even before you're officially diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
So it's like a silent threat.
Yeah, it is. So the book says it's super important to know your risk factors and get tested if you need to. It really pushes the glucose tolerance test, often with insulin levels measured too, as the best way to catch prediabetes early.
Catch it before it becomes a bigger problem.
Exactly. And the numbers are pretty scary.
Oh, yeah. What are they?
Well, at the time the book was written, they said something like 16 million Americans had diabetes, and another 1 in 3 people with diabetes didn't even know they had it.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
It is, and the book lists all these things that might put you at risk, urging anyone who fits that description to get tested.
So if you're worried, definitely talk to your doctor.
Absolutely.
So what exactly is this glucose tolerance test? What does it tell you?
Okay, so basically, they check your blood sugar after you fasted overnight. Then you drink this sugary drink, and they check your blood sugar again every so often, like maybe for 5 or 6 hours.
And what do those readings mean?
Well, if your blood sugar is higher than it should be, either after fasting or after the drink, it could mean you have prediabetes or even diabetes.
Yeah.
And if it drops too low after that initial spike, it could be a sign of reactive hypoglycemia, which the book describes as like an early stage of carb intolerance. And if your blood sugar swings up and down a lot, that can also be a problem.
So basically, it's a way to see how your body handles sugar.
Exactly. And the book also gives specific numbers for what normal insulin levels should be. So if your insulin is high, along with abnormal blood sugar readings, that's a sign of insulin resistance, which is a big part of pre-diabetes.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about induction, that first phase of Atkins. What's the main goal of that phase?
Well, induction is all about jump-starting your weight loss. It's designed to kickstart fat burning, get past that metabolic resistance some people have, and show you that you can lose weight even when you're eating, good food.
Right, don't have to starve yourself.
Exactly. And the book says that this phase, which lasts at least 2 weeks, should give you some pretty noticeable results.
So it's like a motivation booster.
Yeah, it is. It's not meant to be a long-term plan, just a way to get things going. And it's really important to follow the rules carefully during induction to make sure it works.
So what are the rules?
Okay, so you eat 3 meals a day, no more than 6 hours apart, and you don't skip meals.
Got it.
You eat lots of eggs, all kinds of meat, and fish. But there are some limits on shellfish, like oysters and mussels, and you want to be careful with processed meats because they can have added sugar.
Okay.
Your carbs are capped at 20 grams a day, mostly from salad greens and a few other veggies like broccoli and cauliflower.
So lots of salads.
Yeah. And you can have some full-fat cheese and certain salad dressings that don't have sugar. Healthy fats and oils are good, especially olive oil, but no margarine, and don't cook with polyunsaturated oils at high heat.
Good to know.
Yeah. And for drinks, it's clear broth, club soda, a little heavy cream, decaf coffee and tea, diet soda with sucralose or saccharin, essence-flavored seltzer without aspartame, herb tea without sugar, a little lemon or lime juice, and plain water.
So basically no sugar in anything.
Right. And the book also says which artificial sweeteners are okay.
Like Splenda, right.
Yeah, sucralose, saccharin, cyclamate, aspartame K, and some sugar alcohols like maltitol. But stay away from anything ending in O's, like maltose, dextrose, and no aspartame.
Okay, I'm writing all this down.
Good idea. And there's a whole list of things you can't have during induction.
Yeah.
Sugar, grains, milk, yogurt, fruit, starchy vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, most diet products, caffeine, alcohol.
Wow, that's a lot of restrictions.
It is. But the book gives you tips, too. Like, read food labels carefully. Be wary of prepared salads because they can sneak in extra carbs. Drink lots of water, at least 64 ounces a day. And think about psyllium husks for fiber.
So it's strict, but it's doable.
Right.
So what can you actually eat during induction?
Well, for breakfast, you could have an omelet with ham, cheese, and mushrooms. Or bacon and eggs. Or smoked salmon with cream cheese.
Okay, my bad.
For lunch, a chef's salad without croutons, a cheeseburger without the bun, and no ketchup, chicken Caesar salad without croutons, tuna or chicken salad.
Those sound pretty normal.
Yeah, and for dinner, you can have things like lamb chops, salmon, chicken, steak, lobster, seafood, always with a salad.
I like the sound of that.
And for appetizers or snacks, shrimp cocktail with a mustard and mayo sauce, pate, steamed clams. For dessert, a little cheese or sugar-free gelatin with heavy cream.
So you can still eat good food, even in induction.
Exactly. It's not about starving yourself. It's about making different choices.
And the book says the goal is to get rid of those cravings and those blood sugar crashes.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Now, the book talks about supplements, especially during induction.
Right. So the book says that a lot of people start the diet without enough of certain nutrients because of how they were eating before. So taking supplements can be helpful, especially in the beginning.
What kind of supplements?
Well, it recommends a good multivitamin, vitamin C, vitamin E, a B complex, chromium, zinc, selenium. It even mentions L-glutamine for sugar cravings and fiber supplements like wheat bran or psyllium husks for constipation.
It was like giving your body extra support.
Exactly.
So for someone who's about to start induction, what's the most important thing to remember?
The book says to eat until you're satisfied, but not stuffed.
That can be tricky.
Yeah, it can be,
Perhaps.
especially if you're used to overeating.
Right.
So the book suggests eating until you're not hungry anymore, then waiting a few minutes to see if you're really still hungry before you have more.
So it's about being mindful.
Exactly.
And what about those common problems people have when they first start induction, like hunger, cravings, that kind of thing?
Right. The book talks about those too. It says if you're hungry, make sure you're eating enough of the allowed foods and maybe have some low-carb snacks between meals.
Okay.
If you're having cravings, check food labels for hidden sugars and see if there are any low-carb substitutes for the things you're craving.
Makes sense.
For constipation, drink lots of water and try fiber supplements. Leg cramps can happen sometimes, and that's usually because you're losing electrolytes. So you can try supplementing with potassium, magnesium, and calcium. And some people get bad breath, which is just your body burning fat. So drink more water and chew on parsley.
And what about vegetarians?
Yeah, the book says induction could be tough for vegetarians because there aren't as many options that are both low-carb and vegetarian.